All right. So we're almost near the end of the program. All right. Last session was negotiating offers, making receiving offers. Now we're in the, I guess, the last final stage of getting to the closing table. How do we facilitate the transaction to the end? Right. Once we've made a deal, right? Once getting an offer accepted, is that the end for us?
Definitely not.
No, right? We still have a whole transaction process to go through, depending on how we systematically arranged our escrow is going to dictate the level of, I guess, performance or the level of attention you have to pay during the process. And the market's going to dictate that a bit as well. Market's going to dictate that as well. So today we'll talk about some timelines. We'll talk about best practices and how to avoid risks. What to do is get referrals and gather reviews. And then we'll talk about some post-close and follow-up. And we'll finish with our recap and ahas. And according to Gary Keller here, the real estate transactions aren't particularly trouble-free, right? It's a strenuous and trying time that requires all the attention and effort. No, he dictated on how you schedule everything and how you set up that escrow. Going to dictate whether you're going to have more stress or less stress, or if you're going to have a smooth transaction and get to the finish line with little friction. The day, that's the goal, right? The deadlines and contracts and timelines. That's the first thing we should talk about. What are some of the deadlines in the contract? You guys aren't totally new, right? What are some deadlines in the contract that we have to be cognizant of?
I think
what's the first deadline? What's the first thing that you have to do once you get an offer accepted that's dictated in the contract? What's the first course of action? Yeah. Ideas?
EMD?
EMD. That's right. That's the first deadline. Whether it's going to be 3 days or it could be 24 hours. Got to get that EMD into escrow. What other deadlines are there besides the obvious close of escrow date?
Contingency?
Contingency removals. That's it. All right. So after we get the deposit in, we negotiate contingencies. Now, today, sometimes we have no contingencies, which makes life a little simpler and one less deadline to worry about. But nevertheless, you have the contingencies that you have to follow up on and make sure people are adhering to the timeline. Anything else? What if the property is occupied by a tenant? All right, when is the tenant out? According to the contract, when does the tenant have to get out? Can they leave on the day of closing or after? Not if it's by default, right? If it's a tenant, they have to be out 5 days prior to close of escrow. If it's a seller, they don't necessarily have to be out that much sooner, but there's always the date that you have to do your final walkthrough and then close of escrow. What happens after close of escrow? Are there any other contractual possibilities?
I think so. Things that comes up, the buyer finds that need you to address back to the seller.
Yeah, that goes with the contingencies.
Gotcha.
Right? If you have property condition contingencies, you have to clear those. Absolutely. But after close of escrow, does the buyer possession at close of escrow? Not always, right? Sometimes there's a rent back. 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months. Could be as long as 6 months. So even though there's a close of escrow, our responsibilities don't end, right? We still have to help facilitate, or it's good service dictates that we should help facilitate the transfer of possession, even if it's after close of escrow and we've already gotten paid. So a few things that we have to put in our calendar. Now, one of the best ways to keep yourself organized, obviously, is to keep a journal or keep a track. And you'll see that in Command, one of the first required, it's optional actually, documents is, what's it called? Your kind of contract outline, if you want, timeline. Kind of a quick page that goes over when your deadlines are. If you work with a transaction coordinator, which I highly recommend, transaction coordinator, when I submit my paperwork of an approved offer, they quickly push out the calendar when everything's supposed to happen. When is the EMD coming in? What are contingencies? What contingencies are in play? And when are they set to be removed? When is the possession and when is the close of escrow? So here we have an example of a basic contract timeline, right? You get an escrow 9/2. If you have contingencies, looks like here in the contract they had 11 days. So there's an inspection period end and then closing on 10/2. But there's a lot more different. I mean, besides this, there's a few more points that we've already talked about, right? Acceptance, you have your EMD time, you have your inspection period end and contingency period end, and then negotiations for any repairs.
I have a quick question for that chart that you just showed.
Yes.
For the inspection, what type of inspection is that?
So there's an inspection period, which grants you a time after your offer is after your offer has been accepted, to go ahead and further evaluate the property should you need to. There's a myriad of inspections that you can order. The three basic ones are your property inspection, which is your general property inspection. They're going to go through and test all the appliances, make sure all the systems of the house work. That's probably your most overall invasive inspection. Then you have your termite inspection, which deals with not just termites, but any type of rot or deteriorating wood. That's termites as well as water damage. You can order a roof inspection. We'll give you a timeline of approximate age of the roof, and if there's any issues with the roof that may need to be addressed or repaired to certify it leak-free. Those are the three basic ones that come. Now, on that home inspection, he may find problems with the foundation. Now, foundations require another layer of expertise. So he's qualified to tell you, oh, there's a crack in the foundation, but he's not qualified to tell you how bad it is. What's the consequence? Well, they tell you the consequence of that crack, but how much to repair they don't do, because home inspectors don't do any repairs. Their only mission is inspection. So if there's, let's say, a problem with the foundation, you're going to call a foundation inspector to get a foundation inspection. But you would only do that if there is evidence of a problem. That's not necessarily an inspection you call outright. Same with like a mold inspection. If there's mold inside the property or you see some discoloration and you know your clients have allergies or could have a problem, and you may order a mold inspection. Those are also about a $2,000 adventure. But, you know, if your client's important to them, it could be important. And then various different things that you may find, like if they find insulation material and they say, oh, there's possible this. If you want to get it checked for asbestos, you can.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. But a myriad of now today.
I'm sorry, it's a question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You said that for the three inspection category, but general inspections, can you tell me what would be included? Because I'm from Texas as a realtor there. So when we talk about general home inspection, we're including 5 areas. One is the roof, one's foundation, one is plumbing system, one is the electrical system, and also the HVAC. But you say here for the roof inspection is excluded from the general inspection. Can you just Okay, yeah, clarify. Thank you.
The general will inspect the roof, but they won't give as detailed of a report. And it depends on what on the property. There's here we have old wood shake shingles. The most popular is composition shingles. And then you get into more expensive, fancier things like tiles and concrete tiles and ceramic tiles, things of that nature that not everyone has the level of expertise necessary, especially not only to inspect, but just to walk on some of those tile roofs. So not all home inspectors do a thorough job of inspecting the roof. So you
So
may,
what we
and the
included,
roof
yeah.
inspection is only, like the home inspection is between $400 to $600, depending on how big the house is. The roof inspection is maybe $150, $200 at the most.
Okay, so what be included in the general home inspection here?
So they're gonna go through the systems of the house. They'll check all the appliances, they'll check all the major appliances and make sure that they work. And they'll go through, inspect the electrical, they'll open the electrical panel. They'll inspect it. They're not going to and they'll make comments on it. If there's a problem there, like if there's a big rat's nest in the electrical panel and they can't really determine what's going where, then they'll recommend an electrical inspection. Remember, general inspector is kind of like a generalist. He can provide an overview, but they never go deep into the actual costs or any potential serious ramifications. They'll always defer to another specialist. So they'll see mold, but they won't test the mold. They may see, oh, there's discoloration, which may be mold. I recommend hiring a mold inspector. So, and same with, they'll go through and they'll check the windowsills and everything, and they'll see it being.
Sorry, cannot hear you.
Yeah, I think he froze.
Hello? Cannot hear you. Sorry, I think you froze.
For a moment.
Hey, Sean,
Yes. Hey.
you said you are a realtor in Texas.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I see. So are you learning about like California real estate?
I got my license last week here.
I see.
Yeah,
think-
I've been with Keller Williams in Texas for 6 years there already. And I moved here in California last summer, actually.
Cool. Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of people move from California to Texas, and you doing the other way.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm doing the other way. Yes.
Oh,
How about
welcome
you?
back.
Okay, sorry, Mark. Hey.
No, it's all good. I apologize. My internet connection dropped for a second. Now, for some reason, I can't seem to get there. So we were talking about home inspections, right?
Right.
So just the home inspection is kind of the broad overview. Depending
Okay.
on what they find out, you're going to want to maybe hire additional inspectors. But let's talk a
Okay.
little bit about the reality of our market today.
Great.
We're in a very heavy sellers market. In most cases, the inspections are done ahead of time by the listing side. And the reality is there's more than likely more than one buyer going after the property. That being said, in many cases, most of the time, because you want to win the multiple offer situation, you accept whatever inspections are provided by the listing side. You just work with that. In many cases, the contingencies are also foregone. So there is no further inspections. Now, the buyer, whether they have the contingency or not, still has the right to evaluate and inspect the property before closing and make sure everything is what they expect it to be. And they may decide otherwise and want to cancel, but their deposit may be foregone. In some cases, it's worth it for the buyer to walk away. It's rare, but it happens. Happened to me last year where a buyer changed their mind 3 days into it. They didn't have any contingency, so yeah, we took their deposit. It wasn't easy. It's not always a slam dunk, but if the buyer and seller are motivated to go after that dough, mine were, and we did, and we got it. So you have to be careful with those non-contingent offers, but that is the reality of today. Many offers are coming in without contingencies. And in many cases in our area, a lot of the stuff we're talking about doesn't apply because we wrap up when we make the deal. 2 years ago, I had a listing in San Jose, a friend of mine selling this house, moving to Livermore. I know he has a wife and his wife has friends in real estate. We made the deal. We sold his house. We're about 2 weeks into the escrow. Guy calls me up all upset. He goes, Mark, where's my escrow calendar? You're supposed to tell me, when are we going to have these timelines? When are contingencies going to remove? Are the buyers going to have any inspections? He was all freaking out. Remember, this is already 2 weeks into our escrow period. I said, Benny, relax. I can tell you're probably talking to another agent somewhere, but don't worry. Here in Silicon Valley, we do things professionally in the right way. If you would like an escrow calendar, here's your calendar. We close next Thursday. We wrapped up the inspections when we did the inspections ahead of time. Buyer removed their contingencies when they submitted their offer. We already negotiated everything there is to negotiate. There is no worry of having to lose extra money. Your bottom line is what I told you it was when we closed escrow. We close escrow next Thursday. You'll be paid on Friday. If you'd like me to put that in an email for you, I'd be happy to do it. That's your escrow calendar, right? But remember, other parts of the country and either other parts of the state don't operate the same way that we do. So it's important that you know the whole process and understand the different timelines, because you may have a client that want to, we have several agents that sell buy sides up on the way to Sacramento, or sometimes in the Central Valley where the market's a little slower. So they still have contingencies and they still follow the full escrow calendars like we used to before our market went crazy a few years ago.
One question for you, Mark. You said, because I'm a new agent, so I don't know, but why are there like offers today that are non-contingent?
Well, they're offering today non-contingent because they want to be aggressive and they want to win the multiple offer situation. That would be non-contingent. If there's no other offer, then the other reason you would go non-contingent is possibly get a better price. Like I have some flippers that in my database, they don't care about they want the property in the worst condition possible, so they invest money in fixing it, right? But when they buy the property, they're experts. They're not necessarily concerned about what the inspections say. They just want the lowest possible price. So they'll go in at a lower price, but their value proposition to the seller is, well, Mr. Seller, you'll take our lower price, but we're going to close in 10 days. And we're not going to give you any problems. We're not going to ask to renegotiate. We're not even going to inspect the property. In 10 days, this lump sum of cash will be in your account and the title will be in my account. Good. And if they agree to it, then that would be the reason to go without contingencies. But if we're operating market level, meaning, buyers are paying market level prices, they want to be confident about the condition of the property, make sure they're buying something that they think what they're buying is what they think they're buying, right? I think I'm buying a beautiful house that doesn't require any maintenance or issues for the next couple of years, right? The invited inspector, and you realize, oh man, there's a lot of upkeep I have to do at this place, because although things might look great beneath the surface, there may be some deferred maintenance or issues, right? So it's an interesting process, but it's one that's what we work through. It's when we get paid the big bucks.
Interesting. Thank you.
So here it's asking us for a quick, I'm not going to break us up into groups because there's only a few of us. We can just work through this ourselves together. And it's asking us to write down all the people that are involved in a real estate transaction. So besides the buyer and the seller, buyer's agent, listing agent, they could be the same person. Who else would be involved in a real estate transaction? What do you think?
Would there be a loan officer as well?
If there's a loan officer, absolutely. Very good. Any other people besides a loan officer?
Probably a third-party escrow.
Exactly. Third-party escrow?
Then
Absolutely.
inspectors.
Yep.
Lender, appraiser,
Lenders, yes.
appraisal.
Yes.
Mm.
These are all factors and all people we have to deal with throughout the course of a transaction. All right, the escrow holder, you have your escrow officer. They're the ones that are facilitating the transaction, shuffling paperwork back and forth, making sure all documentation is appropriate. And they also verify that the seller is legally able to sell the property. They are who they say they are. Once you get an offer accepted, well, in Santa Clara County, the seller typically pays title and escrow fees. So we open escrow when we take the listing. Not every county operates this way, like San Mateo County, the buyer title and escrow fees. So some cases they do it pre-escrow, pre-contract escrow, but in some cases they wait till the buyer gets their offer accepted. Their chooses. The bottom line is whoever's paying for the service is who chooses the service. But we're seeing now, and you'll see it when you're on the MLS looking at different properties, even in buyer pay areas, the listing agents may select a pre-escrow, and although they can't force you to use them, they'll ask you to. And whether you do or you don't is up to you. If it's multiple offer situations, you want to win, best thing to do is do what the listing agent asks. Those regards, because the price difference between escrow companies is very nominal. There is a difference of a few $100s between one of them. It's not a big difference. So not enough to not win the deal. We have our inspectors to deal with and appraisers. If there's inspections that are going to happen, whoever orders the inspection is the person who meets the inspector and gives them access, my experience. But at the end of the day, as a listing agent, our job is to facilitate the transaction successfully. So if I have to meet an inspector, I have to meet an inspector. If I have to let the appraiser in, I let the appraiser in. Even though it may be the buyer's agent's job, I want that appraisal to happen today. I want the contingency removed tomorrow. So in order to facilitate that, if I have to, I have to. So although there may be norms of who does what between the agents, at the end of the day, the work still needs to get done. And if the result of that work is going to affect the happiness of your clients, then I suggest you take personal responsibility for that. Like the biggest example I see of this is regarding cleanliness of the property, right? According to the contract, when the property transfers title or transfers ownership, there has to be free of debris and garbage, and it has to be broom clean. Now, some people want their buyer to enter into a spotless environment where they can just move right in. That's not the contractual expectation. And if that's what you're promising your buyer as a buyer's agent, but then you ask the listing agent to clean the house, it's a no-no. Because the listing agent, oh, they may agree to it, they're not going to clean it to your satisfaction. The likelihood of you being upset is high. The likelihood of your buyer being unsatisfied is also high. So if it's important to you to have that experience for your buyer, then make sure you're responsible for that outcome, right? Mr. Buyer, we close escrow. Technically, I can have your keys to you by 3 p.m. today. However, my cleaner is going to come in to make sure that the place is spotless for you at my expense. That's my service level to you, right? So that way you're in control of that outcome. A lot of times I get other agents calling me. I'm the broker. I get a lot of these calls. They get upset. Oh, your agent didn't clean the house. I'm like, well, what does the contract say? And cleanliness is subjective. What's clean to me may not be clean to you, may be dirty to somebody else, right? It's kind of it is, but sometimes it is. Like your mom asks you to clean your room, you clean your room, then you call your mom for the inspection. She goes, no, clean your room. It's not to my level, right? So it's the same thing. You want to make sure that your customer is satisfied. If it's important, you take the responsibility, hire the cleaner, and make sure they do it to your satisfaction. Don't put it on the other agent. They will fail you most times. That's the reality.
So in this case, you would absorb the cost of, having a cleaning crew.
Yeah, it's a few $100.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and everything on that, what does the agent absorb the expense on? There's a myriad of things that factor into, am I willing to pay for this or not? A lot of it's going to be based on how much I'm getting, right? If I'm getting a full 3% commission, bullshit going back to other things, and yeah, I have a little bit of a fair amount of dough coming out of the experience. I want a referral from this client, so I want them to be super duper happy. Yeah, it's a few $100. It's placing an ad in the paper to get more clients. It's cheaper than paying Google pay-per-click to get more clients. Clean the house, make your clients happy, they give you a referral. That's the best. That's the best lead you can get. So we have lenders, appraisers, inspectors, and escrow, and your cleaner, right? To make your clients happy. Probably a handyman would be a good person to have in your database, because undoubtedly there's small issues that could be resolved quickly and easily. And don't underestimate the power of convenience, guys. Like, I have a handyman, I trust him, I love him, I've used him for years and years and years. If I call him, he shows up and gets it done. Right? Because I do it all the time, and I'm hiring him all the time, so he's always happy when I call. If you're a homeowner, maybe you're a first-time home buyer, you don't know who to call. So, referral from the agent, take care of it for your client. Right, Mr. Client, obviously you just bought a house. These houses that we sell aren't new. There's always issues that need to be resolved. Another layer of high level of service you can offer. Hey, 5 hours of handyman. My handyman will show up tomorrow. Tell them all your projects, will solve them for you. That way your buyer comes in to an environment that they can feel comfortable and happy. They'll gladly share your good deeds with their friends and hopefully get you some referrals. Are we good on the people involved in the transaction? Or do you guys have any other questions before I move on? All right, moving on. So as we go through the timeline, go through the buyer's timeline, what's the first thing that the buyer needs? What do we think? We just got into escrow. Their offer was accepted. What's the first thing that we need to do for our buyers? The first deadline happens within 24 to 36 hours.
Probably getting the deposit, the EMD getting deposit into the escrow.
Yep, getting deposit into the escrow. So we need to identify who the escrow is, where that money needs to go, and they need to be directed to do that. The buyers are going to, what are the buyers going to need to know and do? Put the deposit in, they're going to need to know who the title company is and what their routing instructions are. for wires, or their address to walk in a check. Now, earnest money deposits can be personal checks. They can put a personal check in. The final closing, though, cannot be a personal check. That has to be guaranteed funds. Because remember, we're starting the escrow, so there's 30 days before closing. If that deposit check bounces, it's not like you gave the house away. So that one can be a personal check.
So you're saying when you close, you cannot use a personal check?
To bring the closing funds to escrow, you cannot use a personal check. You have to wire or get a cashier's check. That's the last step. But the first step for the earnest money deposit, that can be a personal check. These
Wow.
days, most of the time, it's wires. The wire. Inside, when you make your offer, one of the first pages that preempt the offer, there's a few documents that preempt the actual offer itself. And one of those is a wire fraud advisory, because it is real and it is a big problem. And it can be devastating, because if you wire the money to the wrong place, you might not get it back. It's not like paying with a credit card where your purchases are protected. No, these are wires. Once that money's gone, it's gone. Because once it goes from point A, within seconds, it can go to point A through Z around the world. You don't even know. Money's gone. So number one, just make your buyers beware of phishing scams, and only take wiring instructions from the mouth or directly from the title company. And you call them, not them calling you. So just be very mindful of the escrow officer's number. That's their number. That's the only number you reach them on, Mr. Buyer, and call them for the wiring instructions. All right, so the buyers need to know where to put their deposit, and then they need to, if there's any inspections, and what are their timelines. You need to know those too. How about the rest of the team? All right, we have another agent, we have inspectors, we have lenders. All right, the lender needs to start working on the loan. So they're going to need documents. They're going to need the preliminary title report, and they're going to need the purchase agreement. So after you congratulate everyone for getting it accepted, you send that information, prelim and contract, to the lender. You need to order the inspections if we're doing that. And we also need to go through the disclosures. Now, again, market dictates behavior, and disclosures these days are provided upfront. And the expectation from many listing agents is that the buyers sign all the disclosures when they submit their offer. That takes away a contingency for those disclosures. And it kind of tightens up the transaction, reduces the amount of further negotiation. You'll also need to send the contract to the escrow officer so they know what instructions to follow. And if you are inspecting, again, you need to order those inspections. And you order them for your buyer. Don't let the buyer do it. Good practice might be to offer them a choice of a couple of inspectors. Hey, Mr. Buyer, I have inspector A, B, or C. Which one would you like? I'll call it guys and arrange the inspection. Then what can you do at each point to bulletproof the transaction and set yourself and your buyer up for a successful close? The biggest thing I'll tell you is being timely and work forward quickly. And our job in that is educating your buyer and making sure they're motivated. Obviously, we dictate them have a pre-approval in order to move forward, but that doesn't obligate them to use that lender on those terms. The buyer could change their mind and use a different lender. There's nothing wrong with that, other than time. So again, we want to educate our buyers to make sure their lender is pre-selected so that we know where we're going right away. And if you have those financing contingencies, we want those removed in a timely manner. Hold on one second. Sorry, guys. Came up to the front door and my dog decided to say hi. So make sure your buyers know, pick your lender, make sure you're committed to that lender. That way you don't have any delays with removing those contingencies. And in most cases, again, buyers are pre-approved, competition's fierce, you may forego that financing contingency in the contract. And that's all the buyer's choice. Are they comfortable with their employment? Are they comfortable with their credit? And then appraisal, that's part of our job, right? Our job is to evaluate markets. So we should have an understanding if the price property on the contract, is it reasonable to expect it will appraise, or are we pushing the boundaries and maybe it's questionable whether the property will appraise? Because if it doesn't appraise, you're going to have problems. Maybe, but you'll have another conversation with the other side. You better have to do some more negotiating. The best way really is to anticipate potential problems. And also educate the buyer to make sure they don't do anything silly that'll prevent them from closing escrow. What are some silly things a buyer could do that could change their scenario and prevent them from closing escrow? What do you guys think?
Switching lender in between.
Switching lenders will cause delays. What else? How about quitting their job? Quit your job till it funds. Not till it funds. Walk into the office one day, had a poor agent sitting there. This is back when before I was a broker, but he's in misery. 2 days before closing, his buyer decided to quit his job because he thought all was fine and well. We had his final approval. Everything's going swimmingly. House will be mine tomorrow. Next week, I'll find a new job. No. Lender calls to verify employment prior to funding. Finds out the guy quits his job. Guess what happens? There's no funding. There is no closing. Tell your buyers not to quit their job in escrow. No matter how far along the approval is, until those loans are funded, they can be taken back. Also goes with changing your credit score. Don't do anything silly to change your credit score, i.e., buy big things. You want a new car, you deserve a new car, buy it after you close escrow. Buy it the day after. Because if you buy it while you're in escrow, you're going to mess up your ratios, you could mess up your loan. Yeah, great, you're buying, you need new furniture. Buy the furniture. If you're buying it on credit, buy it after you close escrow. You don't want to change your credit scenario while you're in escrow, because you can lose your loan. Those loan approvals are subject to. Let's say, yeah, you're approved and finally approved, subject to us finally verifying your employment before we send the money. or changes in credit. Now, when these hurdles happen, and they happen every now and then, you know, not all is lost. You can negotiate and keep things together. It's just you might not be closing on time. You have to negotiate a closing extension. Not always the funnest conversation to have because the other side's expecting to close and they're expecting their money. So you may not get a very positive response from the other agent. They may be upset. Your buyer did what? The hell are you thinking? Didn't you tell them? I did, and they did. I'm sorry. We are where we are. How can we resolve and move forward? Conflict resolution is part of our job. And lots of agents are very happy, even-keeled people. Not all of us. Not all of us. Just be cognizant of that and maintain your cool. Always maintain your demeanor, if you will. We're doing our job to protect our buyer. Our job to protect the buyer is to make sure they're well informed about the condition of the property that they're buying. Right? We do this with inspections and providing our own expertise and guidance. And then the buyer also has to have a layer of competence and understanding to read the inspections and understand what they're buying. They're not completely absolved of that liability either. But if you educate your buyer and make sure that they're aware of, not only the condition of the house, but also the factors in the process, like don't go buy a car, don't go spend money right now, don't quit your job until we close escrow, things of that nature. That guy, by the way, did end up closing on that house. He just had to get a different loan from a different bank. It was a different rate. It is what it is. And that job trick cost him a few $1,000s, but he still got the house. Any other thoughts or ideas of what we can do to get ahead of problems to make sure that our clients are always happy with us? At the end of the day, communication is critical. Make sure you're always in constant communication with your client. Whether you made a mistake, they made a mistake, or the other side made a mistake, never avoid it. Always consult with your client. Let them know. Don't let them find shit out without you. You always want to be the bringer of all information.
Hey, Mark.
Yes, Warren.
Can't agree more with you on that one. I just had a closing that was like already delayed, and then both the loan agent and the buyer agent ghosted me for like a day or two. Like, what's going on here? And it's unbelievable, but oh well, it's closing.
Yeah. You always want to keep communication open, even if you have no news. Sometimes just telling them, hey, we're still in, haven't heard anything from the other side. Sit tight. I'll call you tomorrow. Make sure you call them tomorrow. Make sure you call them tomorrow. All right. So here's kind of an example of that buyer timeline. Right, just a quick review. You get in escrow on 9/2, earnest money comes in, inspector list goes to the buyer's agent if they want to run more inspections. You let the listing agent know of any inspections that are coming in because someone has to let the inspectors in. Usually it's the buyer's agent, but if there's a scheduling conflict, sometimes the listing agent. Kind of hate that, but it happens. You actually have the inspections performed. After you have the inspections performed, well, why did we get those inspections? To understand the property, and then probably ask for some consideration from the other side based on the results of those inspections. Now, when negotiating these types of repairs and property condition issues, If the issues are disclosed prior to you getting into contract, meaning the listing agent has provided all the inspections that you're going to need, all of the items that have been disclosed to you have been accepted by the buyer. That is that understanding. If you have new inspectors and the new inspectors find new items that were not previously disclosed, those new items are absolutely up for debate and negotiation. Absolutely. But all the old stuff that we already knew about, kind of bad for them to come back and ask for consideration for those things. But if new items are discovered, absolutely within your right and form to ask for consideration. And when I say consideration, that's either have the other side make or give you money for those repairs. You negotiate all the unknowns from those inspections, and you have an agreement. Sometime congruently as those things go on, the appraiser, if there's a lender, is going through their process, and the lender is going through the final approvals. And then you have your final walkthrough. The walkthrough is there, A, to verify two things. The property is in the same condition it was when the offer was made. And two, if there's any repairs that were negotiated for to complete, those repairs. The walkthrough is not a contingency. Almost. Oh, that quick, guys. Sorry about that. You have what I'll say is you have a contract. The contract stipulates that the property be in a certain condition, or that the seller, it stipulates that the property be in the same condition it was when the deal was made. So in this case, the grass was green, it's no longer green, it's brown. New grass is going to cost probably $8,000 to $10,000. So it's not an insignificant expense, right? But the seller is obligated for that. Can we hold up the close of escrow? No, we don't. We can still close escrow, but the seller, per the contract, has to provide us a green log. There's two ways they can do it. They can either just do it or pay for it. I always recommend taking money and letting the buyers rectify the problems to their satisfaction. But the seller is in a losing position. They can't argue not paying that money. And you don't hold up the closing. You could. The seller obligated, the buyer still has the right to take that seller to mediation arbitration and sue them for that grass. And they don't have to worry about paying lawyer fees. You just hire the lawyer. The loser pays the fees. Once that's properly explained, they typically write a check and make it happen with an apology for not watering a lot. That's happened over. But nevertheless, there could be conditions in that walkthrough, right, that your buyer may be upset about. At the end of the day, the purpose of the walkthrough is documentation. You document everything. If there's things that still need to be remedied, you document that, put it on the seller to sign. If they sign, basically they're agreeing to making those remedies. But shampooing carpets isn't one of them. Remember, broom clean.
One question.
Yeah.
So during the timeline, before you close, or I mean after you close to, or after the contract is accepted to closing, what are some of the issues that you would encounter, like during the inspection process, or with communication with the seller or the agents?
So the biggest challenge is if there's other issues with the property that are come up with inspections, and you negotiate with the other side. The sellers don't want to pay anything and they never want to make any repairs. The buyers don't want to buy a property with a problem. So you have to bring those two together. That's our job. That's one of the main reasons we exist. And one of the main reasons this whole system exists in this way, because we have two agents that are working together for the successful close. Whereas sometimes if there's principles involved, there's emotions, there's egos, there's issues. So they may get offended with each other, right? And decide not to talk anymore. So with two agents in the middle as a buffer, it makes it easier to avoid those conflicts. Because as we get the shit from the seller or the buyer, we soften it when we present it to the other side. And then they give us their issue, and then we soften it and present it to the other side. And then we do our best to bring them to an agreement or an understanding. Okay. Appraisal is the other thing. The shortfall in the appraisal is the other issue that comes up rather frequently, so especially when the market's rapidly ascending as it is now. And again, it goes back to negotiations. Hey, do you have do you have the contingency, Mr. Buyer? If you don't have the contingency, well, you're in a much weaker position because your deposits, if you don't close, you lose your deposit. The seller keeps your deposit. But at the end of the day, the seller doesn't want your deposit. They don't want 3%. They want 100%. They want to close escrow. They want to move on with their life. So sometimes it may make more sense to suffer some unpleasantness with the buyer that you have here because he will nevertheless close in a week. The alternative is to cancel this agreement from the seller's perspective and say, okay, well, now we're back on the market starting from square one. And the first question I got asked when we do that is, well, why didn't it close? What's wrong with the house? What did the buyer find out that made it no longer acceptable for them, right? And it's a whole conversation you don't want to have as a listing agent. You want to make sure that you pick the right one and have it go to closing. So appraisal and property condition are the two main things that we'll have to hammer out potentially during the escrow process. All right, so points of interaction and communication. Well, you're going to communicate the deadlines. You need to communicate that with your client, of course, but also you make sure that you're in agreement with the other side. You accepted, we accepted this contract at 11 p.m. Let's delay the starting timelines another day. That's Or the other side may say, no, a day is a day. It is what it is. All right, communicating the contract to the other parties, such as title and lending. Once you get an escrow, you got to send the contract to those two entities. Make sure the lender and buyer are in communication. And you should also be familiar with that process. What's the process that the loan goes through? Okay. Mr. Buyer, did you submit your application? Did you sign the application? Did they pull your credit? This is all pre-approved. Once a lender receives an approval, they have conditions. Make sure the buyer is meeting those conditions. After conditions have been met, then they go to documents. So when you're communicating with your lender, Mr. Lender, when can we expect loan documents in escrow? Or are those loan documents going to be coming on time? And this is something that you should be getting ahead of as the buyer's agent and communicating with the lender. Because if there's a delay and you're going to need to negotiate an extension, doing it sooner is better than doing it later. Communication list or list of recommended title companies, inspectors, and insurance agents or whatnot. Going to give that information to your client. In our area, though, most of us, we take the responsibility of ordering the inspections and opening title. Insurance agents, we give them to the buyer to do their research, buy their own insurance. And typically, side note, anytime you refer someone to a client, it's a good rule of thumb to refer multiple people. Because let's say you refer one inspector and they hire that inspector and that inspector makes a mistake or don't do a good job, right? Then the blame is all on you. You could have legal liability there. Whereas if you give your buyer a choice of 3 or 4 different inspectors, then they have some liability for making that choice. Right, scheduling and communication with inspectors and the listing agent. You know, time is of the essence for us too, guys. One of my biggest sticklers on this is I want all inspections. If I'm there, I want them all at the same time. I use a transaction coordinator, so they are the ones that are coordinating it. But those are my rules. Mr. Coordinator, make sure my termite and home inspection are all at the same time. I only want to show up to this property once. Because remember, guys, you're already in escrow. What's our highest dollar value job as part of all the different things that we do as real estate agents? The highest dollar value is lead generation. That's where you make the most money per effort. Facilitating inspections, the idiot can do. Scheduling inspections, anybody can do. Need a brain though, make sure they're coordinated. But we have good coordinators to help you with that. Communicating with your clients is a high dollar reward item because they can give you a referral, right, if you do a good job. But doing a lot of this minutia work, when you're new, you want to do it to understand it, but the goal should be to get out of doing it as soon as possible. Because if you're, spending 2 days facilitating inspections, that's 2 days. You could have made 50 calls. You could have gotten 2 or 3 more deals in the pipeline instead of mindlessly driving to a property and opening a door. So be cognizant of your time. These things still have to happen. Doesn't mean you have to do them. Just something for the future to build on. Right, sending amendments or inspection reports to the other side, title and lending. You want to make sure the paperwork is done. And this is probably the biggest reason why I hire a transaction coordinator. It's because the paperwork doesn't always come through perfectly every time. There may be additional documents, and there's always documents that you have to chase after. And again, it goes back to time value of money kind of thing. Calling the other side, hounding them for documents is not a high dollar value activity. Right? That's something you should offload to an assistant or a transaction coordinator. And they'll chase all the documents down to make sure that you're in compliance and you get paid on time. And again, things to consider here, right? When am I reminding the buyer to not make big purchases when you get an escrow? Right away. Actually, you may even let them know in your in your initial consultation that, hey, if you're going to make a commitment to buy a property, then make that commitment. The property is your next big purchase. Anything else waits until after, because you don't want to change your credit scenario. Ratios could be off. It could make a significant difference in everything. So let them know right away. How do I negotiate the inspection report, and what am I communicating this information? The inspection reports, if they're ahead of time, you're going to negotiate those factors when you're making your offer. If you have further inspections or new items come to light after you've closed escrow, then you have to negotiate those items. How do you negotiate them? There's more than one way to do it. You can ask the other side to make the repair, or you can ask for money. My personal opinion, I prefer money. Because if you ask a seller to repair something that they don't care about because they're moving out of the house, they're going to make the repair to their satisfaction to the minimal standards. Whereas the buyer who's buying this house is going to live with this repair for as long as they own this house. They may want it repaired differently. They may want a better job. Well, God bless them. It's their right, it's their house. Let's negotiate a fair dollar amount so the buyer can do what they want. Now, there are some limitations to that you have to be aware of as the agent. The lender, if you're working with a cash buyer, it doesn't matter. You can have all the kickbacks back and forth to the buyer, it doesn't matter. With a lender involved, they are going to limit the amount of money that the seller can give to the buyer in lieu of repairs. They're typically going to limit to 1 to 3% of the purchase price, or limit to offset closing costs that are non-recurring. So if you have a $2,000 to $3,000 repair, you can get cash for that. If it's something major, like a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 issue, then you may want to consider a price adjustment, because it's a little too, $40,000, $50,000 issue is a little, it'll probably go beyond what the lender will allow as far as kickbacks go. And the reason they do this, pre-2008, that's actually fairly commonplace. Like, you sell a house for $500,000, it has an old kitchen, the buyer wants a new kitchen. So they say, well, let's put $530,000 on the property. We'll ask for a $30K credit to get a new kitchen. As long as you approach $530,000, no problem. They give you the money, buyer gets extra $30K with the thought of remodeling that kitchen. But then they see the $30K. I like $30K. Kitchen's no longer that important to me. Since they're right, they take the $30K, they don't remodel the kitchen, but then the market changes. They can no longer afford a home, right? Bank forecloses. Bank says, well, shit, we gave an extra $30,000 for a new kitchen, but I foreclosed on a house that has a full kitchen. We not only gave this person money, it didn't solve the problem. Now we're stuck holding this house with an old kitchen. It's worth even less than what we, maybe we're going to lose our shirt on it. So they no longer allow big ticket kickbacks for those repairs. 1 to 3% they will allow. So if it's something major, you're going to price it, or you may decide that this isn't, right? There could be some factors in the new inspection that may turn the buyer off. If you have a contingency, cancel, get your deposit back. If you don't have a contingency, well, it may be cheaper to give them the deposit and just walk away. That's something you have to understand. Not the thing you want to do. Nobody wants to lose money. Sometimes it's the right move though. So unlikely, but could be. Your greatest leverage in negotiating repairs is a contingency, because that contingency gives the buyer deposit back. They walk away. Maybe they spent $1,000 on inspections. It's okay, lose $1,000. Better than to lose the $1,000 than to inherit a property with a $500,000 problem, right? So negotiate the outcome that you like. If you can come to an agreement, then you remove the contingency. The contingency is your leverage. You remove the contingency, now you have the deposit on the hook. If you change your mind, you're going to lose that 3%. That's your leverage to get the seller to make repairs or give you some type of consideration. And if you don't have the contingency, well, you're in a weaker position, because now if the seller says, well, no, they have your deposit, right? So they may not be inclined. They may say, well, maybe I think the next buyer is not going to have a problem with this, so I'm going to take your deposit and we'll put it back in the market. Okay, they're right. So the contingency is your greatest source of leverage for that negotiation. Once you have an agreement on those repairs, you document it in writing, everything in writing, everything in writing. And yes, text messages and emails are writing, but a written addendum with signatures is the best. Emails are admissible. Text messages are questionable. Good habit, if you have a discussion with the others and you negotiate a change, immediately document whatever was negotiated verbally in an email. Send it away so that you have a written documentation. And you may also want to end that email with, hey, if you disagree with what I just said, please respond within 24 hours. Otherwise, this summary will suffice as to the agreement that we made verbally. And then produce an addendum for the buyers and sellers to sign, outlining the terms that you negotiated. I don't know how many times I've had agents calling me complaining that, oh, the other side, the agent promised to pay for this, but now they're not paying. Well, did you get it in writing? No. I'm sorry then. If I don't have anything in writing, there's nothing I can hold over their head to force them to pay. And when do you touch base with a lender, title company, or a listing agent? The only thing I say is several times throughout the transaction. Don't assume that the lender is doing his job. Always good practice to call them every 3 or 4 days to make sure everything's going smoothly. Are we still expecting loan docs on the date you promised them? Are we still expecting the closing time? Did the buyer deliver the documents for the conditions? Right. If you don't have that documentation, you'll have very little leg to stand on should problems arise. And they do. So you're going to call the lender throughout. The title company, you're going to just verify that they received the earnest money deposit. And then when the loan docs are in, you're communicating with them to schedule the sign-off. And then you want to contact the listing agent also periodically throughout the transaction. Let them know that your buyers have reached their milestones with the loan and be in communication. We want to play nice in the sandbox, guys. We want to have good relationships with the agents on the other side of transactions. If they're really good and quality people, they may be good for your downline. You may think about recruiting them into Keller Williams, of course. But also B, the chances of you seeing them again or transactions, especially the established agents, is very high. So you want to create a relationship to whereby they trust you and like you, so that the next offer that comes in when you're 1 of 10, you get extra consideration because they already know you and they know you, how you work and how you handle your escrows. So if you do a good job with your reputation, when the market's, right now we're in a pretty heavy seller's market. Last year, this time, we were in a crazy seller's market. I've told my buyers, if I don't know the listing agent, your chances of buying this house are less than 5%. That's real. That's reality. If I know the listing agent, your chances of buying this property are 25 to 30%. Right? Whenever you're competing with 5, 6, if you're competing with 3 or 4 offers, there's a good chance you can win if you have a good relationship. If you're competing, because the agents will tell you where you need to be. No one's going to give you a discount, but they'll give you the information you need because they like you and they want to work with you. Right? So you always want to make sure you have a good relationship. Now, if the other side are difficult and they're a problem, note that too, right? Because one day you're going to be on the listing side and you're going to be gathering offers, right? And two offers are going to be similar, and you're going to say, oh, I know this listing, this buyer's agent gave me lots of problems last time. This one closed escrow without issue. Which one am I going to be pulling for my seller to pick? Right? The one with the low issues. So understand the market that you're in will help you navigate that also. So strong sellers market, it's a you're the listing agent's best friend. Anything they ask for, you do. Otherwise, you won't win. If it's a buyer's market, it's a different side. Now the listing agent's chasing after you. They're going to be calling you with boxes of chocolates and wine. Oh, bring your buyer back for another visit. You want to sell them the house, right? Whereas in a seller's market, the buyer's agents are doing, you do whatever the listing agent asks. That's how you get your offer accepted. And building that relationship. The documents, getting documents signed. I love DocuSign. That technology has probably made the greatest impact of making an agent's life easier. Because I no longer need to drag my client into my office to sign documents. I can send it to them in the email, and I don't have to worry about them printing and signing it and sending it back, degrade it, right? DocuSign, you send it out, it gets signed electronically, it's tracked, admissible in court, legally binding. In fact, I won't take a client that's not technologically adept enough to use DocuSign. I don't have the systems to work any other way. I'm not coming to your house to sign paperwork. I have 100 agents that can do that. Hear about it. Now, what's the plan for follow-up after a document has been sent to the responsible party? That's also where you're kind of working with the TC comes in. The TC is the one that's really following up for all those documents. Sometimes as the agent, you need to get involved if the TC is asking for documents and just not coming through. Then you have to maybe need to make a call. And of course, you can create templates. You can create document timeline templates. Make life easy. And again, I go back to leveraging the transaction coordinator. I know it's a few $100, but it saves you so much headache, time, and effort that you can spend in the hours that they take chasing down documents. You can spend that time lead generating and get more deals. Has any questions or concerns on this buyer timeline?
Hey, Mark, thank
Yeah. Sean, please. I guess no question. Okay. A question comes up, if you remember, feel free. We have a small group. Just unmute yourself and talk. No worries. All right, from the seller side. Who are all the people that might be involved in a seller transaction?
It's the same set of people, right?
The same set for sure, because you still need, there may or may not be a lender, but you're going to work with that lender through the buyer or the buyer's agent. But what other things that perhaps the seller has to do to get the result, the successful sale? Who has to involved in that trend. We still have inspectors, right? The seller may order the pre-escrow inspections. So we still have inspectors to work with. But then we have to get the listing ready for the market, right? What's that? What involves marketing a listing?
That's probably getting a listing agent to work with you and.
Oh, you are the listing agent. This is the listing side.
Oh, I see. Probably a photographer or a photographer.
Yep. Need a photographer, house cleaner, maybe
Stage people.
stagers, like everyone, handy people, everyone that you need to prepare a property for the market. Those people may need to be called upon again for advice, right? If the buyer inspection comes out and says, oh, the bathroom floor is rotted and it's a $20,000 repair, you may want to call your termite guy and say, man, these guys are coming at me with a $20,000 repair. Here's the report. What can you do for me? Right? So you still need to leverage your own people to validate opportunities or to make sure that the buyer's not being unreasonable. Yeah, and also, it depends on how adept you are at marketing and making things pretty, right? You may leverage our marketing department to help you come up with marketing collateral, social media posts, different things that you're going to need to promote the property. But then, you have your success and you have your escrow. You found your buyer that made an offer, and now you're in escrow. What do the sellers need to know and do? Right, the buyer is going to go through their investigative process. So the seller may need to provide access to their property, especially if they're living there. Right, got to let the seller know coming. Got to let them in. If there's any other inspections happening, communicate those. It's cool if the seller lives there because then they can provide access. You don't have to necessarily open the door for them. The seller's there, they can provide access for the inspectors or appraisers. But you should still call them and make sure, oh, the appraiser come, how'd it go? Okay. They seem to be in a bad mood or good mood. You should be. Sometimes though, if the value is questionable on appraisal, so it may appraise, may not appraise, then it does make sense for the listing agent to meet the appraiser and offer some opinions. Say, Mr. Appraiser, I know we're a little high. I do have 3 comps that justify this price. Share them with you. Or, I know that these ones that sold for less maybe weren't as remodeled as this. So understand that, Mr. Appraiser. Whatever little, there's not much influence that we have, but we do have a little bit. We do have a little bit. And on appraisals, make sure that the appraiser is local. It's about the only thing you can do. If the appraisal is not local, the likelihood of a problem goes exponentially up through. Because especially our area, if they're from out of area, they don't understand how multiple offers necessarily work. They don't understand that the list price was $199 and the sale price is $2.5 because the house is really worth $265, right? So sometimes you have to explain that. But ultimately, your relationship with that appraiser should try to be a positive one. Try to make friends. We'll have plenty of time to yell at him when the appraiser comes back. The appraisal comes in short. Then you can start questioning or working towards a different solution. But from a seller's perspective, most of the escrow process is kind of waiting for the buyer to go through their process. and then responding to any requests that the buyer makes. As the agent, it's our job to make sure that the timelines are adhered to. So follow up with the buyer agent, make sure that they're removing their contingencies on time, make sure that earnest money's in, make sure the contingencies are removed, and make sure that the loan docs are in, so that we're closing on time. We don't need to go ahead and create any extensions or addendums. If there are issues or delays, you want to document them. And if you need to extend contingency times, you have to do that with a proper form. Same with the close of escrow. So here's the seller timelines, right? You put the market, you accepted the offer, so you make market as pending in the MLS. Some agents wait till the earnest money deposit hits before they mark it as pending. It's up to you when to do it. If there's no contingencies in the offer, I'll mark it as pending right away. And that's mostly to do with, I want their deposit if they cancel. I had a situation earlier this year where the buyers made a non-contingent offer, but they never made their deposit and they wanted to cancel right away. I talked to the attorney said, don't grant them the cancellation. Just keep sending notices to, when someone doesn't do what they're supposed to do at the time they're supposed to, like let's say your contingencies are supposed to be removed on Monday, but it's Tuesday and they haven't been removed. They don't automatically get removed. The buyer still has to remove them in writing. The seller has to do what's called give notice to perform. So this gives the buyer an additional 24 to 48 hours to do what they're supposed to do. If they don't do it, then the seller has the right to cancel. So we want to understand and make sure that we don't give them the cancellation options. Or limit them a little bit. All right, so we go pending in MLS. Inform the sellers that if there's inspections coming, if the property is vacant, it's a little easier. Any additional inspections, you want to send them to the seller if you're going to negotiate the repairs. Also, you have your appraiser. If the appraisal is low, definitely we're going to have to renegotiate one thing or another. If the appraisal is low, either the buyer has to come with more money or the seller has to accept less. Then last but not least, review the closing statements. Make sure the escrow company put the costs on the right side of the page. Right, those were determined in your offer. Who pays for what? Who pays title and escrow? Who pays for the inspections if there's any outstanding debts? But again, you want to communicate all deadlines, and not only your clients, but also to the other parties. And you want to do it to the other parties to make sure you're on the same page, you have an understanding. Communicate all the lists of recommended vendors. Again, also send the contract to the title company. Communicate any inspections. And then if you need to make amendments or addendums, do so. So the documentation points, right? Are you just communicating something or are you documenting something? And ultimately, every communication that you have, it's a good practice to document. because that way you remember what people say. In our business, we're going to have, you know, if you're busy, you're going to have 10, 15 conversations with different people before lunch. So you want to make sure that everything that you talked about for a specific situation is clear for that situation. So Keller Williams makes it a little easier for us. We have our command software, which will help guide you through the process. Now, once all documents are signed by all parties, they get uploaded into command within 24 or 48 hours of signature. Then the compliance department, myself and the compliance team review the documents, make sure everything's in place and appropriately signed. That's pretty much it. Buyer and seller side. Now you want to avoid risks. Communicate clearly and often with everyone involved. Set expectations up front. Clearly, in my earlier story, where my client and friend was calling upset about not having an escrow calendar, I should have just been more, and I think I was. I think maybe he just forgot. But yeah, the expectations. What are we expecting? I'm expecting to close on Thursday. Everything else is done. Or we're going to close on Thursday if the buyer's blah, blah, blah timelines are met. So we'll know at those times. Make sure your client understands when those things are happening. And communication is everything. It'll avoid most problems. Lack of communication will start most problems. As far as deals falling apart, where do you think where is the risk of a deal falling apart? What do you think? Yes.
Probably at the inspections.
Inspections and appraisal. Those are the two biggest things that will kill the deal. And what can we do to keep the deal alive? Really communicate. Communicate. Yeah, communicate. Make sure your buyer's understanding, what is this inspector saying? Is this a big problem or a little problem? Right? The buyer can be flipping out over a $50 repair. It's like, bro, it's $1 million house. It's a $50 repair. Okay. You know, sometimes it's like that. But sometimes it's not $50. Sometimes it's a serious issue and you have to negotiate. You have to know who to call to get expert advice from. So it's a good practice to have a trusted foundation expert, inspector that you can call. Understand what's big and what's not. Need a fiduciary. Sometimes the client's best interest is not aligned with ours. Right? If you haven't sold the house in a couple of months, you need that closing, But if the situation's not right for your client, that's better to walk away. You'll sell that client another house eventually. Whereas if you let them get into a problem, you may lose that client. And that's losing that client and all their referrals. Right? Every client you do a good job for, there's a good 2 or 3 people they can refer you to. Whether they do or they don't is it's entirely up to you and how you handle the transaction. But I assure you that in that process of the moment they first meet you, right, and get that initial consultation until the moment they close escrow, they will come into at least 3 to 5 different people that need your services. Absolutely, they will. They will come across those people. Whether they put you in touch with those people is totally upon you. and how you maintain your communication with your clients and how you maintain your desire for those referrals. Big misconception that we have as agents, new agents especially, is, oh, after I close escrow and they show them how big of a win I gave them, then they will refer me all this business. There's flawed thinking in that. Go back to the timeline. The likelihood of people coming across other people that want to buy or sell a home after they've bought or sold their home is much, much smaller than the likelihood of them coming across people that have your need while they're in the process. They'll have exponentially more opportunities to refer you while you're going through it, as opposed to after. Number one, after you're closed, you're done. They're not hearing from you every 3 days anymore, and there's no reason for you to really call them tomorrow, right? Whereas while you're in escrow, there's a good reason you'll probably call them tomorrow. So there's always, you're constantly more in the top frame one. So don't be afraid to ask for those referrals before you close. You want to ask for referrals every great monumental win that you make them. You ask for referrals that you appreciate the referrals in your initial consultation. You let them know when you have a great win, milestone, negotiate something win for their behalf. And also at the end, and also after. But understand that the likelihood of getting that referral is greater while you're in the process.
And how would you do that throughout the process? Like, how would you ask for their referral even though you're not completing the transaction yet?
Good question. So initially, in the initial consultation, I let people know the difference between how I work and how most agents work. See, Mr. Buyer, most agents spend the majority of their time prospecting for clients. They cold call, they knock on doors, they do all these unpleasant, nasty things, and that's how they spend the majority of their time because they need to get clients. I choose to work a little differently. Instead of spending the majority of my time prospecting for business, I'd rather spend the majority of my time servicing your needs. That way, when you want to see a house, I'm available. That way, when you have an issue, I have the expertise and the time to dissect that issue. When we have situations with the house, I have the time to be able to thoroughly help you review those inspections and create favorable results. The problem occurs is when we close escrow, because instead of spending my time chasing clients, I spent my time helping you. I'm not going to have anybody to work with. And this is where you come in, and this is where I need your help. Throughout the process of buying a home, you will undoubtedly come across other people that are also starting the process of buying a home. And all I ask for in exchange for giving you on my undivided time and attention in your process is for you to refer me those people. Fair? That way you get great service and I get another client before our transaction ends. So I can keep working. Win-win. Mr. Buyer, would you be willing to refer me a client should the opportunity arise? The answer usually is yes. If that answer is no, that's okay. You don't know me very well. What can I do to win your trust and honesty? What has to happen in order for me to facilitate, for you to refer me? What do I have to do? Listen to what they say. Then, as milestones progress and you get closer to the end, you just remind them of their promise to refer you business. And you do so usually at good moments, right? When you won something for them. When you got them in the contract. Congratulations, Mr. Buyer, we won. Get your earnest money ready. Whatever inspections we need to do, we'll take care of. Oh, and by the way, do you happen to know of anyone else? Because now that you've won, I'm going to have an opening for a new buyer. Love for you to help me fill that hole. Do you know anyone that's looking to move? When you remove the contingencies, you're getting closer to the close of escrow. Remind them again, hey, a couple of weeks we'll be done. Congratulations on your new home. If you don't know who are you going to replace yourself with? If you have anyone in your family, friends, relatives, or coworkers, I'm looking forward to meeting them. And if they're happy with you with the work that you've done, sharing your name is a joy for them. Right? And if you're falling short, this is a great point to understand. Mr. Buyer, would you refer me? No, I wouldn't. What did I do wrong? Right? If you don't ask the question, then you'll never know the answer. You'll continue making the mistakes. So always ask the questions. And the referral is kind of like the cherry on top, right? You did a great job. Not only did you do a good enough job, the buyers or your clients agree and they replace themselves before you finish. The goal is if you can get half of your clients to replace themselves before close of escrow, that's the goal. That's the goal. And then for referrals post-closing, it drops to 15 to 20%. Simply because the opportunities are less. They don't come across the same number of people because they're not in the process anymore. Right? If you're in the process, you're at work, you go to the water cooler for some water, your buddy comes over, hey, how's your weekend? I was looking at houses this weekend. Oh, really? I'm thinking of buying a house. Well, voila, let me introduce you to my agent. Right? That conversation happens at the water cooler. If something good happened and you're reminded of it. Because they're in the process, they're going to talk about the process, and that'll attract more opportunities. Any ahas? We have about 10 minutes.
I thought this end at 10:30.
Well, then we're already 20 minutes over.
Oh yeah.
Sorry. I apologize.
But it was pretty insightful though. Thank you so much, Mark.
I'm glad you got something out of it.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Ask for referrals at every conversation throughout the transaction, at the closing transaction. Always ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. And a great way also, at the end of the transaction, always ask for a review. Always ask for a review. The best reviews are video testimonials. So if you can, closing table, you're giving them their keys, pull out your phone, happy clients, selfie, or maybe a quick video, happy clients. Say something about your experience, Mr. Client. Oh, Min is the best agent. He really helped us find the right house. He was very patient with us, and we highly recommend using Min to buy your next house. Awesome. Post that shit. Wow. And then, yeah, post-close follow-up. Make sure you maintain a relationship with your clients. Trust me, there's nothing that hurts more than driving by a house you sold and seeing another agent sign fucking loan. But that's the worst feeling in the world as a real estate agent. I've felt it before. It sucks. And it's only person to blame is you. When I saw that, my client's house, 2 years later, Coldwell Banker sign, I was mad, raving mad. How can this person call somebody else to sell their house? And then I think about it. Well, how many times did I call them after they closed escrow? None. What the hell do you expect? Right? So you have to maintain that relationship with your clients after closing to ensure that you get that business down the road. So you put them on smart plan. One thing I like to do is I put them on an MLS search. Just send them their neighborhood listings, anything that comes up in their neighborhood. That way they're informed about the value of their home at all times. You don't want your clients going to Zillow, give them the information before they have a chance to. And there's tools out there that'll let you do it without taking up too much time. But get people on a smart plan and maintain that communication, maintain that contact. And then also, yeah, don't forget to build your downline and your co-agent relationship business. If you had a great transaction, the agent was a pleasure to work with, you don't have to recruit them. Just let the team leader know and get their permission. Say, Mr. Agent, it was a pleasure working with you. I was just talking to my team leader about you, and he'd like to meet you. Is it okay if I have them give you a call? Sure. Cool. Then go to the team leader. The team leaders are trained to know how to follow up with agents to convert them, and they'll build your downline because you introduced them. And that's pretty much it. Questions, concerns?
When you're saying co-agent, you mean like the agent on the opposite party, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
Agent on the opposite side. Oh, sometimes they're tough to work with, and you don't want them in the office. Yeah. Let the team leader know that too, because we want to protect our culture. We want to have a happy office of good people that are willing to nurture and help each other and support each other, and that's what makes our company so great. We do that by making sure that we only introduce good people. All right. Well, thanks for joining today, man. Have a great, productive day.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you around the offices.
All right, for sure. All right, have a good day.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.